His visit to the border coming just days after that interview.
And our investigator, Liliana Soto, went to Douglas today to cut through all the politics here, hear from the people who live right there on the border. As you'll hear, even families who've been there for generations are divided on the issues.
It's also important to highlight coming to the U.S. requesting asylum is part of U.S. immigration law. Just a mile away from the border is Elsie Ranch.
Growing up here in the 80s, during the Reagan era, it was open borders.
Richard Elsis Jr. grew up on this ranch. He says his experience with undocumented immigrants was different than how it is today.
The expectation was if we saw a family or, a single person or several, it was to make them a bologna sandwich, give them a bag of chips, let them water up, and they'd be off on their way. And we'd wish them well.
Undocumented immigrants meant cheap labor, he says, and in some way, he says, it helped to build what Douglas is today.
There's a lot of hypocrisy by a lot of the farmers out here who, they all hired undocumented migrants through the 80s, through the 90s, and now they won't admit that, because it's not politically expedient for them to be able to admit that.
Douglas is a town with a large Mexican-American population, families with strong ties to Sonora. However, not everyone thinks like Elsie.
I'm all about immigration, but doing it the right way. My parents are both Mexican nationals.
J.C. Flores has dual citizenship. He was born in Douglas, but raised in both Arizona and Agua Prieta, Sonora.
I'm not worried about the mom with her two babies. I'll give them water. I'll give them whatever I can to help them. I feel bad for them. They're looking for a better life. But it's the people that we're not catching.
He says since President Biden took office, there's been open borders, a message that Governor Ducey also gave today.
We need more commitment from Washington to address these needs. There is a perception that our borders are open.
But the border is not open. The U.S. actually continues expelling asylum seekers under Title 42, a policy implemented during the Trump administration. The only difference now is unaccompanied children are not being expelled.
Dijeron de que no estaban ayudando ahorita y no regresaron.
Janet is pregnant. She's fleeing domestic violence, but was apprehended along with her two children by Border Patrol in the Tucson sector this week. She says she traveled for 10 days from Honduras because she heard we have open borders. Now she's advising others to not come.
No se movieran de su país donde están porque aquí las cosas están bien complicadas. Bueno, ayuda casi no hay.
Janet has family in Oklahoma. She won't send her kids alone, she says. Instead, she says she will try again. And just like those that have come before her, under President Obama, Trump, and now Biden, more will continue to come. Elsie says that's because the root of the problem is poverty and violence in other countries.
If you really want to get the job done, then you address what's really going to get the job done.
What do you think is going to get the job done?
It's going to be well, first of all, we have to fix the immigration system. We have to have an immigration system that brings organization to the chaos that is our immigration system today.
And I'm not saying it didn't happen under Trump or all the other presiding presidents, but you definitely seen the difference starting to take effect. And for them to say that it's not a crisis, obviously there's something going on.
What's also a risk here is the economy in border towns like Douglas. It's been a year since border closures started due to the pandemic.
Extremely worried.
Donald Hewish is the mayor of Douglas.
2/3 of our sales tax comes from south of the border.
The economic issues this town faces were not addressed by Governor Ducey.
Growing up here, did you ever see a governor coming to your town?
Only maybe weeks before the election. That's not something you see very, very often, not here in Douglas.
What was your first thought or reaction when you heard the governor is going to have a press conference here in your town?
Well, I mean, it's just, everyone's trying to score political points. It's the hot topic right now, right, is the unaccompanied children coming over. They're only here when the media is going to be here.
Talking about politicians, Florida Senator Rick Scott was also here today, giving a message in both Spanish and English.
You've been here for how many hours or days?
I got here yesterday.
So do you think it's enough time for you to learn what really is going on here in Arizona?
Oh, you try to learn as much as you can, but you always like to spend more time.
We support legal immigration. We want you to come in the front way, not sneaking in the back way.
That's Representative Gail Griffin addressing our current immigration issue.
So are you saying that we should then change the law? Seeking asylum is lawful.
The system, we have laws. We need to enforce the
One of
existing
those laws is asylum law. One of those laws is asylum law. So what are we doing to
We need to
change that?
protect everybody.
So do we need to change the law then?
They need to follow the law.
Our governor invited us to tour the border with him. We are going to follow up on that invitation. In Douglas, I'm Liliana Soto, ABC 15, Arizona.
President Lopez Obrador has referred to President Biden as the migrant president, and officials share with us that the administration is seen as the marketing arm of the cartels to traffic drugs.
That was Governor Doug Ducey linking immigration to drug trafficking during his visit to Douglas in March. But what's the truth? Is there really a connection between the number of immigrants at the border and the amount of drugs coming into the U.S.? ABC 15 investigator Liliana Soto visited the border town of Nogales, and she spoke with law enforcement at both the federal and local levels.
In her in-depth look at the situation, she goes beyond the rhetoric and finds most of the hard drugs coming into Arizona come in through the main ports of entry and are not only being carried by illegal border crossers.
It's been over a year since the border closed to non-essential travel due to the pandemic. Here in Nogales, there's almost no tourism. But when it comes to drugs, they keep flowing.
Last year, we seized over 3 million fentanyl pills. This fiscal year that we're into, we're almost triple the amount of fentanyl that we've seized the same period last year.
That's Michael Humphreys, port director in Nogales, Arizona. He says the number of U.S. citizens and legal residents doing the dirty work for the drug cartels has increased significantly.
Since COVID began, it's pretty much probably 90% U.S. citizens and residents. And because those with tourist visas can't come in because of the current travel restrictions.
Customs and Border Protection says the number of Americans bringing in drugs is a concerning border security issue.
It's mainly through the main gates. That's where most of it comes in.
This is Santa Cruz County Sheriff David Hathaway.
Some of it's concealed in commercial cargo. Sometimes there are, body carriers where people are carrying it on their body, sometimes in vehicles. But that is still, the bulk of it comes through the legal ports of entry. So, Border Patrol does catch some at the checkpoints or just while they're patrolling out in the rural areas, but most of it comes through the actual ports of entry.
Well, U.S. Customs and Border Protection says U.S. citizens and legal residents are the ones carrying most of the drugs across the border. It's a claim Governor Ducey denied during his trip to the border in March.
Drugs are not just coming from, those smugglers from other countries. There are also U.S. citizens, a lot of them, and many of them are teenagers recruited here in our own state. So what are we doing to prevent that?
The first thing I would say is that you should get your facts straight on where this fentanyl and meth, amphetamines, and illegal cocaine is coming from.
We had our facts straight. They come from CBP and the Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Office.
Most of the mules are now U.S. citizens because they can cross. And we see a lot of juveniles and elderly people, like elderly women, being recruited to avoid the suspicions.
They target single moms specifically.
Andrew is one of those American citizens.
They said, we need your car. We're going to take it and we're going to inspect it. We're going to put a tracking device on it. There's a tracking device that we follow. So when they get to Phoenix, I hand it over to somebody there.
He was recruited online by criminal organizations based in Nogales, Sonora, and Phoenix, Arizona. We'll bring you his story and the recruitment techniques used by the drug cartels tomorrow at 10. Liliana Soto, ABC 15, Arizona.
To the border battle now in part 2 of our investigation into who's truly bringing drugs into Arizona. Federal and local law enforcement saying most of the hard drugs come through our legal ports of entry. And because of various border closures, most of these drugs have been smuggled in by Americans for more than a year now.
Our investigator Liliana Soto confronting Governor Ducey in March about those facts, but he denied them. Lily now has testimony of a U.S. citizen caught smuggling drugs at a port of entry and says the recruitment is happening right here in our own state.
Building walls like this one is supposed to stop drugs from entering our country, but for American smugglers,
This wall means nothing.
That's because Americans don't need to carry a backpack full of drugs across the desert. They're using cars and their own bodies.
Somebody accompanies you all the way up till you get into the line in Mariposa. Somebody's in their car with you, so you get to a point where you can't turn back. So you have to keep going forward. And they get off and they leave, and you cross.
Andrew was arrested at the port of entry in Nogales, caught smuggling drugs for criminal organizations based in Nogales, Sonora, and Phoenix, Arizona. He claims he thought he was smuggling cash.
They said, "Do you know what's in your car?" And I said, "No." "You have 21 kilos of crystal meth in your car."
While his time smuggling ended behind bars, it started online.
They ran an ad that said, "We're hiring people to bring cash from Phoenix, Arizona to Nogales, Sonora."
He says the cartels are looking for U.S. citizens in the Phoenix and Tucson areas.
They asked for your driver's license. He told me specifically that the people that they hired the most were single moms in particular.
He says they only want people without a criminal record, going as far to run background checks on potential smugglers.
They're looking for people that don't attract a lot of attention to cross, to do these things, to whether they know it or not.
Andrew did it 3 times.
It's very tempting.
The pay increased from $1,500 to $2,500 quickly.
Would you do it again?
Oh, hell no. No, absolutely not. They're drug dealers, they're drug smugglers. This is one of the ways that they get innocent people.
Claudia Arevalo, a lawyer in Tucson, says there's also an increase in cases of blind mules, people carrying drugs without knowing.
I have seen victims that they have crossed to visit family, to bring relatives. However, they do not know what happens to their cars once they're in Mexico, and when they cross the border, then they get caught with smuggling.
Michael Humphreys, the port director at the Nogales Port of Entry, says there's another shift.
About 1,700 pills concealed internally in the rectum.
Body carriers.
Either strapped around the body or in a body cavity, really since COVID began.
Americans using their bodies to smuggle drugs is something that's been increasing at an alarming rate lately.
1,400 fentanyl pills, vaginal cavity. 1,700 pills, March 30th also. Over 2,000 fentanyl pills, males, females, young, middle-aged, older.
The DA in Nogales says Mexican cartels know their market and are adjusting to it.
They're just like any other company, and they'll adjust to how they can make the most money with disregard for human life.
Liliana Soto, ABC 15, Arizona.
The Valley really feeling it all week long, but that same heat wave also reaching border areas as well, where migrants and their children are at higher risk of dying of heat exposure and severe dehydration. Investigator Liliana Soto spending time at the borders, speaking with those making that dangerous journey, as well as the men and women often called in to save them.
It's 12 p.m. The temperature on top of this mountain, dividing Arizona from El Sasabe, Sonora, already reaching 100 degrees.
I think today we're supposed to hit over 105.
Border Patrol agent Jesus Basavilbaso has been patrolling this area for more than 10 years.
As you can see behind me, the terrain is extreme. The temperatures can be really high, up to 115 degrees.
He says the summers here are deadly.
You have to drink approximately 2 gallons of water a day to be able to be hiking in this Sonoran desert. There's no way you're going to be able to carry that much water. Once you cross the border, you still have to walk many miles, and this terrain is unforgiving.
Unlike other years, migrants are crossing without a guide. Instead, they're using apps like WhatsApp.
They give them a cell phone, they tell them to walk a certain distance, and when you walk over to this peak, then you're going to call this number, and then they're going to tell you where to go.
What they don't tell them is that there's no cell phone reception out here. Their only resource if they get lost is finding one of these rescue beacons.
So the way this works, this has this red button, so if you push this red button, it'll send a signal to our office, and then the agents can deploy and rescue that person.
But not everyone makes it. According to a report by the University of Arizona, there's been an increasing number of remains recovered from southern Arizona. Just last year,
there was 209 according to our data.
Daniel Martinez is a researcher at U of A.
I'm very concerned. I'm concerned that we're going to see record-breaking number of undocumented border crosser remains recovered from southern Arizona in fiscal year 2021.
We're human beings. We don't want anybody to get hurt. Nonetheless, we don't want anybody to die out here.
Agent Basavilbaso worries about migrants being directed to more remote areas to higher elevations.
We don't have unlimited helicopters. We have sometimes people 10, 20 calls at the same time, people calling 911.
Extreme high temperatures also make it harder for helicopters to take off, making rescues like this one extremely risky for everyone involved.
We can't walk in their shoes. We don't know what they're going through. A lot of these migrants here are economic migrants, and they're trying to look for a better life. But risking your life in these temperatures and in these terrains is not worth it.
But for many migrants, risking their life here in the desert is already a better option because they say back there in their countries, they're already dead.
Porque uno ya no puede andar tranquilo.
La muerte era lo que nos esperaba en nuestro país. Y si nos vuelven a mandar a México, la mafia, ya no tenemos nada.
This asylum-seeking family came from El Salvador.
Que me agarraron y me violaron. Sí. Pero que la policía no hace nada, puse no, pero ya con mi hijo sí no. Ahí sí le dije no, ahí sí no, a mi hijo sí no le pueden hacer nada.
This was their second attempt. They first tried to request asylum in Nogales, but were expelled back to Mexico under Title 42.
Llegamos de nuevo ahí a un pueblo que se llama Altar, entonces sí se dieron cuenta pues que éramos ilegales y nos dijeron que teníamos que pagar una cuota para poder nosotros pasarla.
They walked through desolated areas in the Sonoran Desert for 10 hours, unaware of the dangerous heat.
¿Estaban preparados para el calor de aquí? ¿Sabían lo que era el calor aquí?
Nada, nada. Esto fue una sorpresa, o sea, esto ha sido duro yo.
Sometimes it's too late. Sometimes not everybody makes it, and it's very unfortunate that people keep trying. And they keep trying, no matter how many times they hear it, they keep trying.
Liliana Soto, ABC 15, Arizona.
All that unfolds. The town of Gila Bend has declared a state of emergency. Border Patrol now dropping off families seeking asylum, families with infants who don't know where they are, don't have money or food, and the town's mayor saying no one is helping to come up with solutions for all of this. Not Border Patrol, not the governor. ABC 15's Liliana Soto speaking with a community who says they feel pretty left behind.
The problem here is not the number of migrants that were dropped off. We're talking about less than 20. The biggest problem here, the mayor says, is the lack of transparency from Border Patrol, not knowing how often and how many people they would drop off and why it's happening here.
In a town that has no resources, very limited funding, and expecting us to take control of everything, and we just don't have the personnel, we don't have the money, and we don't have the resources. We have no shelters here.
Chris Riggs is the mayor of the town of Gila Bend. He says these families are terrified with no idea of where they were or how to get to their destinations.
It's unconscionable to leave these people here because, quite frankly, the only place I have to put them is right there in that field. And they had babies with them. And to me, a baby is anybody under the age of 12. You can't do that to children. You can't do it. It got very cold. Last night it rained.
He says he had to figure out how to get them to a Phoenix shelter all on his own.
We couldn't find anybody to transport them. We called every non-governmental organization, every governmental organization, and they kept just telling us, we don't have anybody that can help you. So what we ended up doing is I found 2 vans that I was able to borrow. Myself, my wife, and 2 volunteers managed to get them to those shelters.
Have you reached out to the governor's office?
I have reached out to the governor's office. I have yet to hear anything back.
So how did you feel when you saw the governor at the border in Douglas and not here?
Perplexed. Don't understand why this area is being impacted and not being looked at.
Those who also feel left behind are longtime residents of Gila Bend like Beatriz Fable.
Yo anoche me di cuenta en las noticias.
Beatriz has been living here since the 80s. She says this is the first time she's seen migrants dropped off alone right in front of her home.
Pero sí es triste mirar a tantas personas que vienen desde lejos, ¿verdad? Dejan sus hogares y vienen a un lugar donde no conocen a nadie. Y pues se les tiene que tratar con compasión.
The mayor of Gila Bend says there must be a better plan.
It's not time to play politics. This is not a political thing. I'm an independent. I do not want politics brought into this. No matter what side of the spectrum you fall on, this is wrong.
As far as a solution,
pick up the phone, call the governor's office, tell him, declare a state of emergency, release those FEMA funds, release any funding he can get, and help take care of these people. Granted, I know this is not really a state issue. This was made at the federal level, but we can't just leave children in the middle of nowhere.
As for the situation here, one of the migrant children asked the mayor if this was Delaware. The child was trying to get there because that's where mom is. In Gila Bend, I'm Liliana Soto, ABC 15, Arizona.
Yeah, we reached out to both the governor and Border Patrol on this. The governor's office sending a statement that reads in part, "We have not received a formal request for resources or assistance from Gila Bend. As a local jurisdiction, Gila Bend may first work through Maricopa County for assistance." Border Patrol has not yet responded to our request. Some newly leaked data from U.S. Customs and Border Protection reveals more than 170,000 migrants were encountered at the border in March. The data was first obtained by CNN, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. A source telling ABC 15 the numbers do look pretty close to CBP's upcoming reports. So here's how this preliminary data breaks down. 18,800 unaccompanied children, 99,300 single adults, 53,500 families, all encounters within the month of March. So let's break this down. What does this all mean? Investigator Liliana Soto and ABC 15's data analyst Garrett Archer bringing us a perspective through data to determine the reality of what's really happening or has been happening at our border.
Some call it a crisis and blame the current administration.
A man-made crisis caused by elites in Washington, D.C.
Others call it a challenge brought up as a result of the previous administration. There's no doubt the data reveals a concerning issue, but how far back has this been happening?
And I would like to start by asking ABC 15 data analyst Garrett Archer if there's a possibility to break a record here. Garrett?
It does appear that we are going to be at a high that we've not seen in 15 years from 2006. The only number it does appear we will not break a record is for the family units. The family unit encounters is much lower than it was in 2019.
Now, if we look at the number for single adults,
the number of single adults, in fact, is about 3 times higher so far than it typically is.
We're talking about almost 100,000, 58% of all encounters in March. However, it doesn't mean 100,000 single adults crossed the border. And that's because of a policy called Title 42.
Border encounters have been rising since April, when President Trump instituted the Title 42 expulsions at the border.
Aaron Reiklin-Melnick is with the American Immigration Council, an organization that advocates on behalf of immigrants.
Because those expulsions led mostly single adults to be expelled back to Mexico within hours, that let people return to the patterns we haven't seen at the border in nearly 20 years. Many of those are the same person crossing the border multiple times and being turned back quickly.
His research matches with U.S. Customs and Border Protection's data. He says the trend we're seeing now of single adults crossing was bound to happen.
Regardless of who was president in January, we would have seen this trend accelerate. This practice of rapid expulsions of individuals back to Mexico basically replicates what the Border Patrol used to do in the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s with what were known as voluntary returns, where people would cross the border and they'd just be sent right back to Mexico immediately.
So are we seeing the same patterns all over again?
There is an established seasonality to encounters on the southwest border. What we see is that consistently in the past 20 years, the number of encounters goes up from December to March. This plays out in almost all data formats, from the single adults to the unaccompanied minors to the family units. Essentially, every sort of migration pattern does increase from December to March.
Going back to 2 years ago, if you look at 2019, family unit encounters were significantly high.
The CBP operates on a fiscal year of October to September. So if we look at October to March, right now, family unit encounters is half of what it was at 2019. That's how many there were in 2019. 190,000 up to this point, and right now there's only been about 90,000.
But something never seen before is the increasing number of unaccompanied children, almost 19,000 in just 1 month.
That is higher than any other number that has ever been reported by the CBP. So unless something changes in the numbers going forward, 2021 will not only break the record for unaccompanied minors, but will exceed it by a pretty significant amount.
Although data is important, we also need to look at what's underneath those numbers. We'll explore some of those migration causes in the days to come. Liliana Soto, ABC 15, Arizona.
Back to the border now, where more than 20,000 unaccompanied children are now in U.S. government custody. That's according to the latest release by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Homeland Security.
It's in line with data the ABC 15 investigators first reported this week. All new at 6, investigator Liliana Soto goes beyond the numbers, exploring why so many are coming to the U.S.
Heartbreaking video released by Customs and Border Protection this week. An asylum-seeking child afraid and lost on a rural road near the Texas-Mexico border. Data shows in March about 19,000 kids crossed the border alone. Children wanting to reunite with their parents, something immigrant advocates say we've seen before.
We saw this in 2014, we saw this in 2016, in 2018, 2019, and now we're seeing it again in 2021.
Aaron Reichlin-Melnick is with the American Immigration Council, an organization that advocates on behalf of immigrants.
And the reason is always the same: violence, poverty, impunity, corruption, and now climate change.
This is San Marcos, Guatemala. Univision Network recently traveled there to learn more about migration causes. Customs and Border Protection data shows since 2014, most of the unaccompanied children encountered at the U.S.-Mexico border have been from Guatemala. Families in this village say they're tired of being poor, of eating tortillas with salt for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Mama, ¿por qué solo hierba? ¿Por qué solo con sal comemos?
So they say going north to the U.S. is the only way to have a better life.
Es peligroso, ¿qué vamos a hacer? Ni modos. Y si nos quitan la vida, vamos.
They'll take the risk, and smugglers know this. Two alleged smugglers speaking to Univision Network.
En primer lugar, que es fácil la pasada, pero nosotros sabemos muy bien que es difícil.
Hay demasiada gente, créanme que con el beneficio que les está dando su nuevo presidente.
What they don't tell them is that there's a Trump policy called Title 42 that's still in place. Under this policy, all single adults and many families are being expelled or deported. So what are we supposed to do?
There will always be people trying to come to America because of the opportunities.
Natalia Godoy is a Phoenix resident. She believes people deserve to look for a better life, but they must wait in line.
Do the proper paperwork.
Others believe the problem isn't children coming, but how we're treating them.
The maximum amount of time that you can hold anyone and children is 72 hours, but we don't follow these things.
Isis Gill is an activist with Puente.
Holding people in like plastic cages is not any different than any type of bar that you're thinking about.
Governor Ducey has proposed sending the National Guard to the border, something Texas did recently as a solution. But critics ask, is it working?
What you're talking about is people that are really desperate in need of help.
Central America has always dealt with high poverty levels, gang-related violence. UNICEF says the pandemic worsened those conditions. But nothing prepared them for last year's back-to-back hurricanes. It's estimated about 3 million people, including 1 million children, are still in urgent need in that area. Liliana Soto, ABC 15, Arizona.
Heart-wrenching. People, children packed into cage-like holding facilities. You saw our teams on World News Tonight digging into this surge, specifically the minors at the southern border, many being kept in facilities like this one. This is Donna, Texas. Arizona is supposed to start operating similar facilities in Tucson and Yuma next month. And tonight, our continuing coverage on the ground here in Arizona, talking with the people who are being directly impacted in all of this. ABC 15's Liliana Soto speaking with the families just released from Border Patrol stations, now at a Phoenix church.
Speaking to newly processed asylum seekers is often the only way to find out what's going on inside Border Patrol stations. We have requested pictures, access to the facilities, and to ride along with Border Patrol agents, but our request was denied because of COVID protocols.
Que lo tenemos ahí, nos cobijamos con eso. Los niños tienen mucho frío porque nos dejan sin nada, nos quitan nuestras cosas. Pasamos 2 días sin lavarnos los dientes, sin bañar. O sea, no sabemos si era de noche o de día.
Once processed, some asylum seekers end up at this church with Pastor Angel Campos, where they've been helping since 2018.
October 18 through October 19.
He says the pandemic has made their mission challenging this year, but not impossible.
We love it. We love to see the families.
The church offers only transitional housing to families.
First thing, they get fed, and then secondly, they help in getting some clothing and showers. We have a shower for man, shower for woman. And in the meantime, we start with the information, calling their family. We, the church, we Monte Vista, we have the facility. We have the heart, but we don't have the finances.
He says it's a struggle, but worth it after hearing their experiences while in Border Patrol custody.
It feels like jail because they cannot go outside. Like right here, can you hear the birds? They don't hear the birds over there.
Unaccompanied minors face a different situation than the people who end up here. After processing at Border Patrol facilities, they are sent to the Department of Health and Human Services to be reunited with family or sponsors.
Most of the minors come from Central America.
Jorge Mendoza Yescas, the Consul General of Mexico in Phoenix, says Border Patrol contacts the consulates first. And when it comes to children from Mexico,
Mexican consuls try to find where the parents are, if they are in Mexican soil or in the U.S. But if that search is unsuccessful, what happens next right away is that those minors are sent to all the shelters who are contracted by immigration.
He says there are 11 shelters contracted by immigration in Arizona, 10 here in Phoenix, with capacity of housing 3,000 children. It's been reported that right now there are about 5,000 kids in Border Patrol custody across the United States. Liliana Soto, ABC 15, Arizona.